Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Spring 2025 edition of our Community Conversation Series. I'm Sigal Rubin, Senior Instructor and Undergraduate Coordinator for the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, which is housed within the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice here at Florida Atlantic University. The community that is gathered here is comprised of students, faculty and staff, administrators, special guests and friends of FAU, campus partners, and engaged community members. We are grateful and extremely excited that you've chosen to spend part of your evening with us tonight. Our college launched this conversation series as a space to learn, discuss, and explore issues affecting our local communities, focusing on where the professions of social work and criminal justice intersect. The College of Social Work and Criminal Justice is uniquely positioned to host these impactful conversations because of our vision, which is to strive for a more just and resilient society that honors the dignity and worth of every person. And this is why we are here tonight. We do intend for this to be a conversation, and we want to hear from you. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please post them in the chat box and we'll get to them as many as we can during the Q&A. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First up, let's extend a warm welcome to Dr. Randy Blakely, who serves as the Executive Director of the Stiles Nicholson Brain Institute at the Florida Atlantic Jupiter campus. He's responsible for a dozen patents related to his gene discoveries and was elected to serve on the National Advisor Mental Health Council, in addition to his many other accolades as a leading neuroscientist. Thank you, Dr. Blakely, for being here and lending your expertise on neuroscience and the genetics of resiliency.
Great.
Next up, we have Dr. Henriette Van Praag, a principal investigator and neuroscience researcher at the Stiles Nicholson Brain Institute. Her work focuses on the beneficial effects of exercise on brain function and behavior, as well as memory function. Thank you for your time this evening, Dr. Van Praag, and lending your expertise on neuroplasticity, exercise, and mental health. We are grateful for the ongoing interdisciplinary partnership between the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice and the Brain Institute, and are pleased to be able to showcase our collaboration with you here tonight. Next up, I'd like to welcome Robin Rubin, who teaches the Social Work and Positive Wellbeing course in the Phyllis and Harvey Sandler School of Social Work. Her passion is teaching our students the skills necessary to live a flourishing life and how to build their reservoir of positive emotions, work with their negative ones, and increase their resilience. Robin is also the founder of the Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Life Enhancement, which offers recurring wellness programming and interactive workshops. Thanks for being here, Robin, and lending your expertise on positive psychology and well-being. And last but not least, rounding out our amazing panel, welcome Pat McLaughlin, forensics instructor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. He's a retired New York City police detective, patrol officer, and narcotics enforcement officer. During his 15 years as a crime scene technician, Pat processed nearly 8,000 criminal events, ranging from break-ins to homicide, and also trained on numerous forensic disciplines. Pat, we appreciate you lending your expertise specifically about trauma and first responders. So the reason you guys are here, let's dive into the conversation. I'll start with Robin to lay the groundwork on resilience. Robin, from the perspective of positive psychology, what are the key pillars of resilience?
Thank you so much for having me. So in positive psychology, resilience is actually one of the pillars of positive psychology. And the reason for that is because when we are resilient, we actually have a higher sense of well-being. And resilience itself is a teachable mindset. I'll say that again. It's a teachable mindset. And there are actually skills, and these skills are essential for well-being and success. So just to throw out a definition of resilience, resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And it's interesting because we used to think resilience was something that you either have it or you didn't have it, kind of like a superhuman power, like Superman. But we know now, after some research, that it was discovered that it's not true. And there are actually skills for resilience. In fact, nature has wired us to be extremely resilient. In fact, scientists estimate that 99.99% of all species that have ever lived are extinct today, but we are not. So give yourself a pat on the back, right? So back to the skills, which is what Sigal was asking me, the skills for resilience, because in fact, we actually can measure resilience. So we're going to take a look at 7 factors of resilience, and you can throw up that first slide, please. So yeah, there we go. So our resilience depends on our ability to display these 7 skills, and they all can be cultivated and developed. Again, it's not that you either have it or you don't. So we talk first about optimism, and it might sound crazy, but thinking optimistically can actually boost your resilience. In fact, we say in positive psychology, what we think about, we bring about. So try it, thinking optimistically. The second one is emotional regulation. And what this actually means is that when something happens in your life, does the size of the problem match the size of your reaction? Sometimes we react very strongly about something that isn't really a big deal. And we have like a humongous reaction to it, and it doesn't match what actually happened. So pay attention to what these triggers are in your life and make sure that your reaction matches the size of the problem. The third one is self-efficacy. Do we think we can handle this? Have I handled hard things before? Have I come out on the other side stronger? So believing in yourself and being able to overcome difficulties also boosts our resilience. Empathy. Do you have empathy? Can you put yourself in someone else's shoes? It's very important for resilience. Then we have causal analysis. That is the process for identifying and addressing the causes and effects of a challenge or a problem. Because when we're able to have causal analysis, it helps us identify like the root of the problem, and then the symptoms become less impactful on us. Impulse control. Do we lose our cool over small stuff? There's lots of daily inconveniences, traffic, waiting in line. Do we lose our cool, or are we able to control our impulses? And last, but certainly not least, and I think probably the most important skill of resilience is to have the ability to reach out. Are we able to ask for help when we need it? No man is an island. We need each other. A popular saying in positive psychology is that other people matter, and they matter a lot in our life. So when you look at this, actually, you can throw up the next slide, I think. Last slide for this question. Because you can look at these 7 factors of resilience and you can say like, am I low on this? Or do I not have enough of this? And then we're able to work on those things that we're low in to increase our resilience. Any questions about that? Next question.
Thank you, Robin. This really sets a great foundation for us. Pat, I'd like to bring you in next. Often first responders, or those who've experienced trauma, hear the question, what's the worst thing you've seen? Could you explain why this question might not be helpful and possibly even detrimental when speaking with someone experiencing trauma or PTSD?
Sure, I'd love to take a shot at that one. Sigal can actually verify that when we teach our criminal justice summer camp, mostly based on high school students, within a few moments of my lecture, one of them will raise their hand and say, oh, wow, you must have seen some crazy stuff in your time. And follow it up immediately with what's the worst thing or what's the craziest thing you've ever seen. And I do my best when I'm speaking to people that ask that question of me to, one, point out first and foremost, to my mind, it was never a competition. There was never a running list in my brain. And in the case of a high school student, it's much easier to deflect. But as we get older and we start dealing with people who don't seem to concern themselves with that line of questioning, it becomes a little more difficult or problematic. If you consider it this way, someone is asking you to recall the most traumatic moments of your life and produce a response for a purpose that you can't really understand. Is this for entertainment value? Why do you want to know this? And I understand people have a tremendous desire to look into what criminology, criminalists, what crime scene investigators, homicide investigators do. There's a fascination that we can study very readily. There's numerous papers written about why serial killers are the things that we follow the most, or why ID Discovery is on 24/7, or Forensic Files plays 24/7. There is a fascination within that area of study, as well as our entertainment value. But as you approach someone that you know or you hear about, that is a first responder, whether it's a police officer, a firefighter, EMS workers, emergency room staff, all of these people are put into a situation where resiliency has to be their entire focus of their being. You don't get to say, I don't want to go to the next call. If I was investigating a homicide, and I actually had this happen where we had a deceased 3-year-old, within 25 or 30 minutes of completing that, we had to go to a rape case. We didn't get the time. We weren't afforded the ability to absorb it readily, to deradiate from the situation that we had just witnessed before we were going to the following one. And there is a cumulative effect that starts to happen with first responders. Asking them to recall those particular moments is not overwhelmingly appropriate. It would be the equivalent of either asking someone who was deployed to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, well, how many people did you kill while you were over there? Or once in a while, if a student's going to bring the question up, I say it's almost the equivalent of meeting a woman for the first time and asking if they were ever sexually assaulted. And please share how you felt during that period of time. What was that like for you? It is, I don't want to say the worst question you can ask someone, but it is a question that has to come with a certain amount of parameters around it. What is the appropriate place are you doing this at? My wife has repeatedly at cocktail parties or Christmas parties tried to deflect questions like that because it's just not an appropriate venue to do that. There are appropriate places to ask people about that. There are appropriate places for first responders when they're ready to open up for it. But unfortunately, casual conversations are just not the right venue to start that particular topic. So I think we can continue and circle back to that as we move a little forward.
That's an important perspective, Pat. Thank you for clarifying that. Randy, let's move towards the neuroscience angle. From your perspective and as a neuroscientist, how would you define resilience? And what does it look like from a brain science standpoint?
Well, thanks for including us in the discussion today. And when first got that question, I wanted to just stop for a minute and think about where this sort of terminology really came from. And the roots of this etymologically come from how we would express something rebounding or springing back. And in the sort of metallurgy field, you would say the capacity of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation caused especially by compressive stress. Now that sort of sounds like that could apply to us and our brains as well. We like to be flexible and return to our former state. But that's actually not how we're built. And Robin, I wrote it down. You said that we were naturally wired for resiliency. And I think I could add to that, and that we're naturally wired to sustain resiliency, so that we have a capacity of plasticity that goes beyond just coming back to where we were. We learn every second, every minute, all the experiences that we have while we're awake. We are adjusting our perspectives on the world. Our brains are changing synapses, our connectivity in the brain, as you'll hear from Dr. Van Praag, is changing. So we're not quite the same. It's not the quite same definition of resiliency for someone who is, is building things and working with metals. It's something that is actually so deeply embedded in the way our brains can learn and experience that neuroscientists, when they study resiliency, are after. They're trying to come up with a better understanding of how it is that we've been built to have a nervous system that can experience this beautiful world we live in, to be stressed by it, and to return to a state that allows us to continue to learn and express our thoughts and our moods, but to bring with it some forms of memory of learning, and sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that can be a bad thing. So neuroscientists want to understand what are those factors that are built into our nervous system that give us this plasticity, and that where does this plasticity begin? Where do we see it first? How does it affect our developing brain? That leads to, in some cases, lifelong memories and lifelong trauma. It's a double-edged gift here, that the way our nervous systems are built. And then as we go throughout life, our brains continue to be embedded in a dynamic world and dynamic environment. And now we're bringing in a more accumulated state of understanding, of memory, to bear on how we are going to react to changes in our world. And so the question then becomes, for the resiliency at that age, is how do we, based on what we've gathered about our environment, the people we interact with, our world, what is going to be a reasonable and rational approach, so that we make appropriate decisions. When we're babies, when we're children, we're not reacting with that information. Now we are as adults. So how do we incorporate that information into the way we think? Right? How is our nervous system allowing us to do that? There's so many mysteries there, but we are making progress. And then later in life, we have the question of resiliency comes up again. Can I still pursue the activities I did as a 20-year-old, now as a 30-year-old now? And that's a joke. Okay, so you can laugh. Resiliency means, how can I sustain that joy of life, that ability to experience each other, the way in which we can remember things, hold on to things, interpret things. That resiliency is also something that's embedded within us. We know that happens biochemically. We know that happens structurally still in our brains, even when we're as old as I am. And Henriette is going to tell you about that, I think, in just a minute.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for breaking that down, Dr. Blakey. Dr. Van Praag, follow up on Dr. Blakey's insights about the brain. Your research specifically looks into exercise and brain functions. So can you please share with us what exactly happens in our brains when we exercise, and what effects does exercise have on our brain and memory function and behavior?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sigal. And if possible, could somebody share my slides? Yeah, so exercise has profound effects on brain function, and thereby may help us optimize our brain so that we are more resilient in the face of stress or other adverse circumstances that may come along or that inevitably come along throughout life. So you can see here, this is a graph from a summary of human studies that shows that exercise improves planning ability, so that's what is executive function, spatial memory, and also processing speed in humans. And that is accompanied by structural changes that happen in the human brain, such as increases in the gray matter, in the white matter, connectivity between brain areas, brain blood flow, and there are also other physiological correlates of exercise that help that lead to these improvements in cognitive function. Now, it's not just our ability to think more clearly that is improved with exercise training, but also you mind going to the next slide. We can see that exercise has an important effect on mood. For example, this is a graph from a study where there was a comparison was made between people who were treated for major depression, either with an exercise intervention, which was basically treadmill training 3 times a week for 16 weeks, or taking an antidepressant drug. And what you can see here is that the effects of exercise and the antidepressant were pretty well comparable or not much different, and that even that the amount of relapse in the patients was actually less in the exercise condition. So we as neuroscientists then started to wonder, well, what are the underlying effects, or how does exercise exert such beneficial effects on the brain? So first of all, if you look in mouse models, and you can show the next slide, we can see that some of the effects of exercise in humans are recapitulated in the mouse. For example, you can see the performance in a simple task where a mouse has to find a platform that is hidden under the surface of the pool, of a pool that's made a little bit murky with some paint. You can see that mice that are housed with a wheel, a running wheel, do much better on this task than sedentary mice. So in addition, there's also effects of exercise on things that mimic anxiety or depressive-like behavior in mouse models. So when we look at the brains of these animals, we see that there are changes in a brain area that is both important for learning and memory and also for mood regulation. That's called the hippocampus. And one of the most striking things that we see is that there's a change in what we call adult neurogenesis, the production of new neurons in the adult brain. So can you go to the next slide? So here you can see that in these blue cells are part of the hippocampus, and the green cells are these new neurons. And you can see them when they're little. They're 7 days old in the adult brain. They have these short processes. And then at 2 weeks old, they have a little bit more extensions. And then when they're a month old, they're fully integrated into the circuitry, and they contribute meaningfully to behavior, to memory, and to mood. And what we have found in our studies is that the production of these neurons is strongly enhanced by exercise. So if you want to go to the next slide. So what we see is an almost 2- or 3-fold increase in the production of these adult-born neurons in mice that are housed with a running wheel. So this gives us at least a neuroanatomical correlate of some of the effects of exercise on the brain, but by no means all of them. There are many other things that also happen in the brain with exercise, such as an increase in brain blood flow, a reduction in neuroinflammation, upregulation of growth factors in the brain, increases in synaptic plasticity, changes in the morphology of these neurons, and also in other brain areas. So, but this is one of the ways where we can very easily measure the effects of exercise on the brain in our mouse models. So I'll stop here. I can talk about it more a little bit later, but I don't want to take up everybody's time.
Wow, that was really fascinating, Dr. Van Praag. Thank you so much. Before we move on to round two, I just wanted to remind you guys that we really want to hear from you. So if you could please post your questions in the chat, we'll be moving on to the Q&A session soon, and we want to be able to answer all of your questions. For now, feel free to use the reactions feature on your Zoom tools to let us know that you're still with us and how you feel about it so far. All right, let's shift to round two of the conversation. Moving back to Robin, how can each of us build our resilience?
Okay, so how can we build our resilience? Well, I'm going to mention about 7 or 8 things. So number one, we can embrace change. Change is the only thing that is for certain in life. Things are going to change each and every day. So we have to be able to embrace it, and we have to be flexible because things are always going to change. Number two is we have to be able to notice our negative thoughts and counter them. And would you just show that last slide that I have, please? The next one. Yep. So this was just one study that was done in 2014 where they had people, they asked them to look at the bright side of things, just to try to find the bright side. And it's scientifically proven to enhance our resilience. So they went through an exercise, they found out that this exercise of looking on the bright side actually increased their resilience. They were more engaged and experienced decreased negative thinking. So, I mean, it kind of could sound silly, but looking at the bright side and countering our negative thoughts is really important. Like, you know, sometimes we think of what the worst thing that could happen, but what if it all works out? What if it all works out? The third thing that I'll talk about, and I mentioned this as being one of the factors of resilience, about support. So in this way, the way that we build our resilience is to build meaningful connections with people, because that is our social support. The next thing is to learn from our experiences. True knowledge comes from our own experiences, so we have to be able to learn from them. Another thing is being mindful. And being mindful means paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally. We have to be mindful. We also have to believe in ourselves, know that we've all been through tough stuff and that we're strong and we can get through it and we can come out on the other side because we've done it before. Another thing is to take care of yourself. Self-care is so important, and exercise is certainly one of the biggest parts of self-care. I talk about that in my class all the time. Moving your body, self-care. We can't be there for others if we don't take care of ourselves. And I mentioned this before, but being flexible. We need to know that life is going to throw us punches each and every day. That's life. So be ready and know that you can handle it. So those are ways to build it.
These are great strategies, Robin. Thank you so much. Dr. Blakely, you're up next. Given what Robin just shared about practical methods, I'm curious about your view. Is resilience something that we're born with genetically, or is it something that we can actively develop through our experiences and interactions with others?
Well, if we are defining resiliency as an ability that we have to understand and deal with the world around us, which sometimes can be stressful and adverse. We didn't get there without our genetics and our biology to build our minds, to build our brains, to build our minds. So there is a foundation of genetics and biology that gets us to point A. But point A in the development of the brain is a very small starting spot. It's a very important one, but our brain, the wiring in our brain follows some major, well laid out plans that connect different parts of our brain together so that the sounds that we hear in our ears go to a part in our brain that's prepared to understand sound and then to store that information, and likewise for other senses and whatnot. However, we know that experiencing sound, experiencing vision, experiencing everything about our world is needed so that those circuits in our brain that will store that information and use that information can grow and thrive. So it's a bit of a false dichotomy when we talk about experience and being on the one hand and something we can train, and biology on the other hand, that it's not. They're actually working very closely together. The human brain is going to have an explosive period of early growth that then the environment helps refine into who we are. And we all know that we carry our experiences that we've had in childhood, in adolescence. We carry all of that forward, and we are built to continue to rely on the information that we're storing to deal with adverse circumstances. So it's not one or the other. And I'll just give you some examples though of how the intersection between experience and the biology, and it's a two-way street, happens. There's some experiments that we and others have done where we have, now let's focus on the early part of life, where we've tried to model a situation of abandonment. And we can do that in an animal colony by simply moving the mother, in this case a mouse, away from the pups. So let's say a mouse has 8 pups. And you can move the mom away for a period of time. Normally, the pups would stay close with the mom throughout the day for a period of weeks, and then eventually wean away and grow up on their own. But during that early period, they're in close contact with the mother. They're receiving nutrition. They're being groomed. They're being welcomed into the world and all of that. So if we take that mother away for an hour or two during the day, and the pups are there with each other, but without the mom, and then we bring the mother back, and we repeat that once a day for a couple of weeks. And then we don't do anything else. We let the mom and the pups grow up. The pups leave the nest, as it were, and then we test them as adults. That little period of pseudo abandonment or self-enforced abandonment, us taking the mother away, leaves a lasting memory in the animal, not so much of what happened, but that something happened. And it is there, and it sets a foundation for responses that would not occur had the mother been there with those pups. So that little small period of time. Now, how do we see that's experience? So now how do we see this biological side of it entering into how you're going to respond to that? So we knew that there were.
So, because Mimi told me to do this.
Okay. So we studied this, and others in the field studied this quite actively by looking at factors that would change how a grown-up mouse would behave in a situation that is going to cause stress and cause, let's say, depressive-like behavior. And we know that early experience will precipitate more of a depressive-like episode in the animal as opposed to one that didn't have it. We understood that there are things happening, and I should say this is not all about the brain. We're very open to the influences of the rest of our body on how the brain functions and develops. And one of the things that we think is quite vital to the end result is how our immune system works and how it continues to communicate with our brain throughout life. But it's also very important during early development. We and others have found that those kinds of early stresses actually trigger immune responses in our bodies. You can see it in the mouse, and we found that if we could take out a target for one of these inflammatory immune molecules in a brain in the animal genetically using modern genetic approaches, that the negative consequences of that early life experience that we could measure by depressive-like behavior in the mice was gone if we eliminated the target for this inflammatory signal. So that shows you that that experience had triggered a biological process. We can just generalize and call it stress, but we can get a little finer. And by getting a little bit finer, we begin to understand the circuits where this is all happening. We might even come up with some interventions that would help us by strengthening those particular circuits so that this early life stress does not perpetuate into our adulthood and carry as a burden for us in later life. So we see the experience and the biology interacting with each other, going back and forth. And so from either side, we have to be prepared to see if we can take the understanding we have there and see how it imprints itself on our biology. And then with our biology, what's the limitation of our biological framework for really doing things just on our own? We may need the support of others. We often do. As Henriette was pointing out, the experience along with medication. In that case, it was running with medication in the mouse experiments. In others, it's psychotherapy with medication, synergizing together. So these things are not easily separable, and neuroscientists today would prefer to keep them all at play. We're very open-minded about that.
Wow, that's very, very informative. Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Blakely. I want to continue this thread. So, Dr. Van Praag, we often hear the mind-body connection. Could you explain to us, is there actual communication happening between our muscles and our brains? And if so, how does that work?
Thank you. Yes, that is a very good question, and that also leads indeed to a more holistic view of neuroscience. That we don't want to just look at the brain in isolation, because obviously there are other organs that many other organs that our body consists of that could directly or indirectly influence how it's function, and this becomes particularly apparent under exercise condition. But as neuroscientists, for many years we were very interested just in what was happening in the brain with exercise. So we found a lot of things that changed, as I already mentioned, blood flow, neurogenesis, changes in growth factors. But then we still couldn't answer, well, how what triggers these changes? And then some studies came out that showed that if you infuse the plasma or the blood from a mouse that is sedentary into, from a mouse that's been exercising into a mouse that was sedentary, there are actually some changes in the brain, like increases in neurogenesis. Also, if you give certain pharmacological agents that activate genetic programs in the muscle, like muscle contraction, that mimic the effects of exercise without the animal actually exercising, if you look at their brains, there also are changes in plasticity that are similar to the effects of exercise on the brain. So that led us to start to think, well, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's a link between muscle and brain. And we did several experiments to look at that. One of them where we grew muscle cells in a dish and then treated them with a compound that mimics effects of, or that makes the muscles contract. And then when we collected what was secreted into the media that was secreted by these cells and put it on neuronal cultures, we saw that those cultures, those neurons became more elaborate, bigger, they formed better connections. So there was, or if it was neural stem cells, they increased their differentiation potential, suggesting that there is a connection between muscle and brain. And we isolated a factor, a relevant protein that was secreted by muscle. And we have since then also linked it to some extent to cognitive function in humans. So humans who exercise have higher levels of this protein, and they also do better on memory tests, and especially those people that have the strongest increase have the best performance on these memory tests. And we actually are not the only ones who have identified such factors, but other groups of researchers have identified different factors, but they all have a common denominator that these factors increase neurotrophin levels, have some effect on neurogenesis, and also play a role in learning and memory and in mood regulation. So why is this important? First of all, as we mentioned, we as scientists like to understand things, so we have a better understanding of the connection now between body and brain. But this also opens up maybe some new therapeutic avenues for treatment of memory dysfunction or of mood disorders, because not everybody can exercise, not everybody is either motivated or has the physical ability, and understanding how these biochemical pathways, how these biological pathways work, may lead us to a completely different class of therapeutics than we have had so far, and thereby help people either regain their strength or regain their resilience to function better in daily life.
So what I hear you saying is that I should be exercising more.
Yeah, otherwise you have to wait until we identify all the biological factors and make the drug that's right. But
such a great connection.
But particularly aerobic activity is even walking or strolling or things that it doesn't have to be all that intense, but anything that people do that's not sedentary behavior is helpful.
What a great connection. Thank you so much. And finally, Pat, given what we've learned from Robin and Dr. Blakely and Dr. Van Praag, I'd like to bring this all together practically from your experience. So when you've interviewed victims of violence, what kinds of emotional reactions or responses have you found to be the most common? And how do people typically respond emotionally in these traumatic events?
Oh, that's very specific. The amount of people that I've interviewed over the course of many years runs the full spectrum of what their responses are. There's a very common expression that everybody mourns differently, everybody grieves differently, but everybody responds to trauma differently as well. There are people that are completely fully functional and can answer every single one of your questions. There are people who can't answer any of your questions whatsoever. One of the things that we studied within police defensive tactics for many years. In my former life, before I was a cop, I worked as a defensive tactics instructor and a female self-defense instructor. I worked as a rape crisis counselor. And what we came to find is the three biggest issues that people have in traumatic events. And it doesn't make really that much of a difference if it's they're witnessing a car accident or they're in the car accident or they hear about it. The three things, the closer you get to actual participation in trauma, is people tend to get auditory exclusion, meaning they don't have the ability to really hear anything around them. They receive tunnel vision, which everything around them tends to only be able to be focused onto one particular area. And what is the biggest kick to everybody is something called tachypsychia, which is if you hear someone say, I was in a car accident and it felt like the car was spinning for hours and hours and hours, because your brain is trying to adapt all of the information around it, but it's only got this much space to be able to put it into. So with all the stimuli around it, if you think of like you're trying to look at a film strip and you've only got this much room to do it, and then slowly but surely after traumatic events happen, you're able to fill in more information. So when we do interviews, we very commonly find that 24 to 48 hours after an event, someone tells you a slightly different story. And a lot of times there's a rush to the thought that this is the person's making something up, or they're lying, or they're reconcocting a story. And my experience is it's not true at all. The person is just able to see with a wider lens every single time they're able to reflect on it. And some people are able to move on very, very quickly and compartmentalize an event and move on to the next one. And other people will spend time saying, I really can't believe that happened yesterday. And I really can't believe that happened a week ago. I can't believe that happened a month ago. And the more they think about it, the more they realize all these little subtle cues that are within them that is allowing them access to a greater level of their memory on a whole, because our brain is really, really good at helping us survive. You can do the fight, flight, or freeze, or there's a whole couple of other F's that are involved with it now. But in a traumatic experience, you have limited information that your brain can process to keep you functioning. And asking you immediately thereafter to recount exactly what happened is very, very difficult. If you're dealing with a victim of, let's say, a robbery, and the person had a gun, and you say, can you give me a description of the perpetrator? And they'll say, well, he had a gun. Okay. You said was it a man or a woman? Yes, but they had this gun. I was looking at the gun. Were they white, black, Hispanic? We're pointing a gun at me. And every time they do it, the gun gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because at that moment, their brain is locked into that particular aspect of the trauma. Trying to get around that and trying to ask other diversionary questions sometimes doesn't work. You have to let them go through that one particular process, because that's what their brain is giving them the input right now. Instead of asking a descriptor, I may ask, well, tell me about the gun. And what color was it? Did it look like the kind of gun that I'm carrying, or did it look like this kind of gun? And I found very frequently what will happen is when I do that, the gun starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And now they're able to say, well, it was in his right hand because he was wearing a red sweatshirt. Okay, so he had a red sweatshirt on. Was it a hooded sweatshirt, a zip top? The details can come back very quickly. But when we are trying to work with people in a traumatic event, whether it's 5 minutes ago or 15 years ago, we have to let them sort of guide the pace. We have to let their brain unlock slowly but surely, and in a way that makes them feel safe to talk about this, in a way that's not confrontational to the person. But we're in a hurry to get the description of the bad guy before they can get too far away. So you want to get that description out really, really fast, which leads you to be abrupt with people like, wait, go back to this, quick, stay on this, stay on this. And they're not capable of doing that right then and there. But an hour after the fact, they can say, oh, as a matter of fact, his wallet was sticking out and I could see his driver's license number or something ridiculous to that effect. Our job working within it when people are suffering the trauma is seeing that path as fast as we can, meaning the interviewer, and then allowing that person to move down that path. And unfortunately, it's going to be at their pace no matter what. Violent crime, even nonviolent crime. If you have some of the most traumatic or traumatized people I've ever met are people that had a burglary occur in their home. And you would think, though, that doesn't make sense. Someone who's been shot or stabbed or assaulted, why would someone who's been burglarized be that much more upset? Because their entire home, their place where they feel safe, has been violated. And that's going to send their brain down a whole bunch of different avenues, which is not appropriate for right now. But they need that particular moment to be upset. Their grandfather's watch was stolen. It's a little tiny detail along those lines that when we do interviews with them and when we speak to them, it has to come from a point of very slow building of that relationship to allow their brain to realize it's safe to talk about whatever it is that's trapped in there. And unfortunately, for my former line of work, that's not always the easiest part. But I, to this day, still say that is the most important part of doing interviews and trying to help people relate their trauma, because they need something to be able to put a solid foot down on before they're going to even start on any of these journeys of healing or being able to understand what happened to them.
Amazing. Thank you, Pat. That was a great way to wrap up the conversation. So thank you all for this insightful conversation. You really bring such a unique and equally important perspective to this important topic. Now I want to shift to our audience questions and see what takeaways are resonating the most. And I see that we have one from Dean Luna, who is the Dean of the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice. Hello, Dean Luna.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to our panelists. What a wonderful conversation. I think my answer was given already by our panelists. I think I went too quickly in posting my question there when I wanted to talk about or find out about factors that would help criminal justice professionals and mental health professionals to build that resilience. But I think our panelists already mentioned several factors. And so that was very helpful to know. So thank you. Thank you.
Can I say something or make a comment, Sigal?
Of course, please. Dr.
Okay.
Robinson is the director of the School of Social Work. So
M-
welcome.
m- Many years ago, I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, when the tornadoes ripped through the town. And I don't know if any of you all remember that, but it was quite traumatic. And the social work students at that time and some of the faculty were trained in psychological first aid. Because it is traumatic when your property, your home, your loved ones are affected by something as tragic as those tornadoes. And what we found was when the students and the faculty, me included, were trained ahead of time, that we would see certain things, we were a little bit more prepared as opposed to just walking up onto the scene. And then at that moment, we would have sessions where we debriefed and we tried to normalize our reactions to it. It's okay that you're upset by this. We just tried to normalize everyone's feelings. And then continuously throughout, we would push students over to the side and talk to them. And we would do debriefing sessions where they talked about what they're saying. And we did this continuously. And then later on in the week, we did follow-up sessions with them. So I'm wondering if crime scene investigators have a process where they're debriefed afterwards, where they're taught to just discuss it, get feedback from peers. I'm just curious.
My long answer would be no. Uh, there really is not an existing mechanism when it comes to that type of work, which unfortunately creates an entire cascade that is unhealthy. This is true for police, firefighters, nurses, etc. where the only people, well, let me step back just one moment in life there, is up until relatively recently, police academies actively told the recruits, do not talk about what you see. Do not tell your family what you see. Do not engage in conversation with them because they're going to worry about you. They're going to be upset when you go to work. Now, if you were to ask my wife, other than the fact that she got the bed to herself every night when I went to work, did she worry about me? She would say yes. I was going to worry one way or the other. It didn't make a difference. I've always been very lucky with the way my wife is able to handle the whatever traumas and stress came along. So it really didn't affect me all that much. But what does become a problem very quickly is the only people, if you're not allowed to talk to your family and you're not allowed to talk to your, your muggle friend who aren't cops or firefighters, the
Sorry, it looks like we might be having some technical
the
difficulties.
only avenue you have is to talk to other cops. And if you're working, when you whatever you're looking at, a slow and steady de-escalation of your ability to cope, because you're only getting one point of view.
Okay.
You're only
That's
getting the point of
interesting.
view of other practitioners only in one setting.
Interesting. I have a good friend who's a police officer, and in 30 years, he's never talked about the job other than when he first became a police officer. But he would also always clam up about it. And the only people he ever talked about it with were other police officers. So I'm wondering if that could be unhealthy as well, because you're talking to some people who might be jaded as well. So I'm just curious.
It's very much jaded. The stigma that very often gets there is rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine.
Yes,
That
yes.
is the highlight of most first responders' self-treatment with other first responders is, okay, well, we're coming in tomorrow night to do it again anyway, so get over it.
Well, to throw out a plug for criminal justice, I know Robin has been involved in working on creating that minor where they're going to add some of that into the training for students. So that's one positive thing that's coming out of this.
Yeah, that's, if I could throw the plug right back. That's one of the things I'm most proud of with this minor being formed, is how much other people want to embrace doing that. If we can teach them in the egg to be resilient and to understand positive coping skills, and I
Yes,
do not mean bourbon, then we give them a lot more ability to cope with material, to understand what they're going to see, and that it's okay that it bothers them. That's
no,
the quintessential function of the first responder in traumatic events is they have to be okay doing it, because if they're not, no one's going to be able to function within that same chaotic atmosphere.
I agree.
Thank you. Those are great questions. We have another question from the audience from Hillary. Do meditation and prayer affect resilience, and is one type of meditation better than another? Have there been studies done on the length and frequency of meditation that are needed for resiliency? Please ask them. Yep, I think yep, there we go.
I can take that, Sigal. I mean, is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay. I mean, I'll just give my 2 cents. So meditation can definitely increase resiliency because it enables us to recover quicker when anger or strong emotions arise. So even if we wish it could, mindfulness isn't going to stop any of these things from happening. It's not going to stop our worries or our troubles from sneaking up on us and reminding us about that traumatic thing that happened. I mean, life is full of ups and downs, but what meditation does is it changes our relationship with those thoughts. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm sure somebody else maybe has something else.
I just throw in from a neurobiological perspective. There's good work on meditation and its ability to strengthen frontal cortex top-down control over other brain regions that may be prone to take over our thoughts in the context of stress. And so in order to recover from stressful episodes, we have to be able to have our memories, our understanding of the world, what we have learned from others, other things besides a traumatic event drive our behavior. And so meditation, as well as certain religious practices, rituals. I was reminded just recently in a lecture by Andrew Newberg on Your Brain on God, and him showing some of the patterns of brain changes in the prefrontal cortex that occur with people who are practicing their particular religious faith. And there's not one better than another, but there are activities, mental activities that will strengthen the connectivity in those very circuits that we need to get past bad episodes. And I think people may not understand what a really strong capacity you have for resiliency until you lose it. Then the world is terrifying. And so that ability that we have in our brains, particularly in our frontal cortex, to help coordinate the traffic and say, okay, well, that's really not helpful, Randy, because stop thinking like that. Is something that we all should cherish, because when we lose it, that it is really not the same world anymore. So meditation can help that. So can prayer for people who have a faith where that is something that they can turn to. But there are other things that will also change. Even intellectual exercises will sharpen our top-down executive network, as we call it, that allows us to make decisions and move forward with our life.
Can I also jump in on that one real quick as well?
For it.
One of the things I probably my biggest fear as I was retiring is, now that I don't have to compartmentalize all the squishy things that I've seen for the last decade and a half, what's going to happen to my brain when I don't have that to worry about? And one of the first things I did within 2 weeks of retiring is I started practicing yoga. And I eventually purloined it into becoming a certified teacher. One of the things that we did in the teacher training was discuss different types of meditation. And we have, I think, a very incorrect version in our brains of what meditation is, because we all think sitting perfect, hands in lotus, saying Om over and over, contemplating your big toe and how it relates to God. And that's not real meditation. I mean, it is for some people. And if that's what creates fluidity within your brain, then that's wonderful. But most of us can't sit still for more than 3 seconds anyway. Meditation doesn't have to be something that is so ritualized and practiced like that. Meditation can be cooking. Meditation could be singing. Meditation could be playing the guitar. Meditation could be cleaning. Whatever it is that you do that brings you that certain level of joy, that has a little bit of a ritualistic effect. Like, I love to cook. So preparing the food, getting the food ready, getting the oven warmed up, running around the kitchen like a lunatic while my wife yells at me because she thinks I'm rushing. All of that is a form of meditation. So when you consider making your brain feel a little bit better, it doesn't necessarily have to be read the Bhagavad Gita and then contemplate that for the next 4 or 5 hours. Meditation is the thing that makes your brain release, not focus overwhelmingly.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Judy, and I'd actually like to ask Dr. Ryan Meldrum this question. Dr. Meldrum is the director of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Judy asks, are you developing and integrating mental health topics into the criminal justice curriculum?
Yeah, Sigal, great question. I think we've seen a lot of the discussion from our panelists already recognize, and Pat in particular, focusing upon the role of mental health in CJ practitioners, but we also know that there's a large segment of juvenile delinquents and adult offenders who have documented mental health problems, and one could argue that prison oftentimes is used as the modern form of mental health institutions because we have so many people that have mental health challenges. And so mental health is a topic that certainly plays into many of the discussions that happen within our criminal justice courses. Many of our theories of delinquency and crime focus upon the role of mental health and negative emotionality and the ways in which people try to stress with cope and trauma. So I'd say it's fairly central to that discussion. I think where tonight's discussion really adds to that is looking upon that positive side of the coin and how resilience training might be able to help offset some of those mental health challenges surrounding depressive symptoms and anxiety and anger. So yes, it is very much a part of our curriculum, and Dr. Robinson had alluded to the fact that we have a new minor in our school, the forensic investigation minor. And as part of that, both Pat and Robin are building out these modules so that those students who go through and want to become the CSI or CSU technicians on scene have those mental health and coping resources and resilience training in their back pocket. So when they go into those jobs, it helps better prepare them for those things. And we see many students in social work taking some of our criminal justice courses and students in criminal justice taking the social work courses. And I know many of the social work courses also emphasize the importance of mental health and, working with populations of vulnerable individuals who might have mental health challenges. So it's very much a topic infused throughout the curriculum on both sides of the coin in both of our schools in the college.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meldrum. Jeffrey, you're up. What do Professor Van Praag and Dr. Blakely think regarding mental imagery and its effect on muscle strength? A study from Dr. Wang, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that name, Cleveland Clinic Foundation 2004, and her results about how mental training alone can lead to measurable muscle strength gains. Would this study relate to resilience? This is open to all panelists.
Well, Henriette, that sounds like one for you. Although it's going in the opposite direction, but now it's biology is a circle here. So what goes in comes out too. So are there things that cognitive states lend themselves to in this specific instance of muscle strengthening?
Well, first of all, I would say that this is a topic that is a little bit outside of my expertise, mental imagery and muscle strength. And also, it is something we cannot model in mice. So it's, I would say that I assume it's possible. I know that top athletes they spend time imaging their movements and their positions and things like that to improve their performance. So mental component is definitely there during training. But as far as outcome measures, as far as I'm concerned, if I can't think of a good model to test it in, then I'm not going to make a judgment on that. But maybe Dr. Blakely has more input, or somebody else on the panel.
Well, I think one of the things that we should contribute with respect to why does doing what we do matter for sort of people on the street, and sometimes the answer there that does make sense is that it also relates to this question is our desperate need for biomarkers of different cognitive states, affective states, of physiological processes that we tend to think are in our head, as we say, right? We would like to be able to have some trace that we can quantify, that we can pull out of the bloodstream or some other, body fluid component that tells us how the brain had experienced something, right? We can have it at a minute to minute or second to second basis with your heart rate, your pulse, but something that would tell us what someone had experienced who cannot communicate to us by sampling a biological process, a biomarker, get a biomarker, could be incredibly helpful in understanding what the person went through, and who may not, I was thinking about that a little bit, Patrick, and you were talking about the slow process of getting information from someone, even to help them directly. That can be agonizing. If we had better tools that perhaps we can develop in the laboratory through the studies that Henriette, you're not willing to go as far as to believe that you'll be able to tell what a mouse is imagining, but you may be able to have gotten a record of some mental process that went forward that would be of great benefit for us to be able to tap into to help them. And so, that's a future for us. We are always looking for ways that we can predict therapeutic outcome. I think probably today we have been talking about a dozen or two different kinds of interventions that would enhance resiliency or bring about a better life in one way or another. And having predictive validity at an individual level would be wonderful, because I'm not going to respond to 9 out of the 10 things that were said, but there's one that would, and I would like to save some money. I'd like to save some time. I'd like to not go down a pathway that's dangerous. And so the more that I can understand, I can get something to quantify as a biological marker, the stronger I think we'll be able to implement something like that. So stay tuned. Maybe some of our brain work will not supplant the wisdom of someone talking someone off a ledge, but it might give us an idea as to whether or not they're headed in that direction in the first place. So
Thank you so much.
When you say biological markers, do you mean something like measuring cortisol under stressful situations or something to that effect?
Biomarkers can be physiological, or they can be biochemical. They can be they have to be highly predictive of something, right? So that we measure. So it could have to do with, your eye blink responses. It could have to do, something that we can measure that stands in as a proxy for a more complicated process that we can't measure. So if I want to understand something about the progression of a disease, let's say pick Alzheimer's disease, and I can find a variable that will tell me that you're a good candidate for one of the new medications for Alzheimer's disease, when it could be very dangerous for me to give you as an older person, not you, but me, as a that therapy, we really want that in our hands, in our toolkit. And the same could be applied to things that are more behavioral in their changes.
Thank you so much. So it does look like we are wrapping up, but I do want to get to the last question on the chat, and that is from Lena. How is the trauma-enforced interview conducted to individuals with developmental disabilities and/or children after they are victims of a crime?
Whenever you're dealing with someone, I have to say, whenever it's possible, whenever you're dealing with someone that has developmental disabilities or even to a greater extent, children, the idea is to remove them from the traumatic incident as much as possible. We try to do as few interviews in a crime scene as physically possible for contamination reasons and logistical reasons. But if I'm trying to get data from that person, I need to have a completely different approach. Children are the best witnesses that we have. They have an uncanny ability to absorb tiny little details that no one had seen. They have an ability to compartmentalize in a very different mannerism. So if you're going to speak to a child, you have to pretend, and this is where a lot of people make mistakes, you're not talking to a tiny adult, you're talking to a child. Their mind works in multiple directions simultaneously, where we like to just go in one direction and stick to it. So there is a giant need to have a very wide notebook, as I like to say, that I can take notes about something they said here, something they said here, and something they said here, because they're going to bounce around and go back and forth. And you have to be able to record as much of this, and I mean physically record, because you try to write down as much as you can, so that a minute after they're done talking, you can very gently guide them back towards, but a minute ago you said this person was this tall. The other issue we have with both developmentally disabled and children is we have to avoid the process of leading them in a question. You want to ask the question in a very open-ended way and allow them to respond to it, as opposed to, was the person tall like me? Was the person wearing a blue shirt like me? Because some people, children, especially if they're dealing with an authority figure, want to please that authority figure. So they're just going to answer yes. You have to open the question up very, very broad and allow them to sort of walk through the door and allow them to, very much like any other trauma victim, set the stage as to where they want it to lead towards. You just spend a lot more time backtracking with children or developmentally disabled, because you want to let them go, have the statement, and then come back to the first question you asked and watch what branch that particular question takes.
Wonderful. Those are really insightful questions. And that's a wrap, folks. So I wanted to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our fantastic panelists. We really appreciate your time and expertise and for providing us with the guidance on this really important and timely topic. To everyone who joined us here tonight, thank you for being with us. If you would like to watch or share the recording of tonight's conversation, you can find it on our college YouTube channel, which Catherine should be posting to the chat right now. And she'll also be posting some links where you can find out more information. I recommend that you copy and paste her message if you'd like to save it, and it will also be added to the video description on YouTube. We hope to see everyone back in the fall for another community conversation series, so stay tuned for those details in the upcoming months. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of your night.